Welcome to Sober Mythology!
In this inaugural episode, we'll be talking about the various heroes on the Greek side of the Trojan War.
Expect juicy takes, Achilles' princess hair, and just a little bit of historical literary analysis.
Please enjoy.
Making lines.
Alright, so we got a recording going.
Yes, we're going to talk about cool things that only cool people care about.
We are talking about cool things. Hi. Okay, well, let's create an actual intro. Okay. And not just be absolute maniacs. Alright, so how do people podcast?
It's like, hi, I'm your host.
Oh, yes.
And you go like that.
Let me tell you where we are right now. Okay, hi. This is Sober Mythology. We are your hosts.
Yes.
Don't worry, the best of podcasts start this way. We are your hosts. Do we want, host names, or do we want to reveal our true identities?
Like Red and Blue from
OSP. I don't know if I could ever be as cool as them, or their podcast.
Identity theft.
We're just some guys. We'll start with just some guys.
We can be like A and B.
That's so boring. It's like clinical.
Like black and white teams for Science Olympiad.
We are Science Olympiad. I am Science, and that is Olympiad.
Hi.
Yeah. We'll change it, we promise. Okay, and you may be wondering, well, what's going on here? Why am I spending my time listening to this glorious recording done on an iPhone at noon?
12:34.
On 12:34, and that is because you want to learn what we know.
About mythology,
because you're like, wow, I wish I knew mythology, but there's so much, misinformation.
Yeah, okay, so your friends are dropping mythology references left and right, and you really want to know what's going on. So obviously, you come to listen to this very niche podcast rather than any credited sources because we are hilarious.
Because we are funny, and we are not citing sources either. But we encourage you to find sources anyway. And take what you learn from here as
This is educational rather than informational.
Yes, you're going to be educated and hopefully have a good time. So as we're thinking, so let's use our brains here.
Let's start with the most infamous character in Greek mythology.
Oh yes, that's what we were starting at.
Yes.
Okay. So this is our inaugural episode, and to start us off strong, because we're focusing on Greek mythology, we're going to start off with our boys from the Trojan War. Now, everybody, give it up for the Trojan War. Yeah. Woo! No, it wasn't as fun. Most famously retold, and told, it was the first time told, in the Iliad. It was famously told in the Iliad. You know the Iliad.
Homer's infamous story really impacted literature as I know it.
Exactly. All the things you love and know are from the Iliad. Everything you don't know from the Iliad. So let's start with not the story of the Trojan War, because that's boring. Let's start with the characters.
Freaking Achilles.
Freaking Achilles. The man, the myth, the legend, the sad boy, the rage boy. What's some of your Achilles hot takes?
My main Achilles hot take is that all the narrative importance and influence aside, and all the symbolism and moral lessons we can learn from his character, he has princess hair. And this is a very important aspect of his character that is often overlooked. His princess hair serves both as a plot device and as a symbol of his divinity. So when artists neglect to feature his princess hair, something deep inside of me stirs and is full of rage.
It's just, it's one of those things, right? Like, in these, old stories, you're given so little. The only thing you get from the stories is, hi, I'm Achilles, this is my dad. And then it's, every single character. If my computer would load, I'd get, the official lists, but we're going unsourced for this beginning. But...
Sources trust me, bro.
Sources trust me, bro. It's bro, just read it. Because I have not finished the Iliad. Hate to break it to you. Do not cite us in any of your papers, please. But, that's, one of the things, right? Is you get so little information, but you get, the information that, Achilles had these gorgeous, beautiful locks, and then it's just well, what are you seeing? You know?
Yeah.
But that's a beautiful hot take.
I would like to say that our unsourced the way we are sharing this information as like unsourced, just what we've heard and what we know, is also how the ancient Greeks shared this information.
True, we are just authentic.
So this is very authentic to how they lived.
We are attempting to demonstrate exactly how the ancient Greeks would have done a podcast if they had. This is oral tradition right here.
Have you ever heard of method acting?
It's like, you should see us now. Homer would be proud.
Homer would be so proud.
That's always the thing about oral tradition, has always made no sense to me, like the idea that just like
people just talked.
People just talked and then remembered stuff, and then like you wrote it down and they're like, this is what he said, and it's like, what?
It's like a very long game of telephone
that people are actually good at. Like, I understand you had nothing else to do because it was like ancient Greece and you had no television and you had no books and you just had Homer, I guess.
They had books. They had books in ancient Greece.
Well, yeah, but apparently no one was reading. They're too busy. Like, you see this guy? He's spitting facts out there. He's naming 15. I think that must be why they have these, like, terribly long descriptions of every soldier in the Greek army, is because it was less of a story and more of a flex of how many fake names you could remember.
I mean, it's like a collaborative creation. I'm sure many of those names are also people just inserting their original characters.
Oh, just OCs?
So they can be part of the universe.
It's like, yeah, and like this guy, he was totally in the story.
He was really cool, guys. He had a whole backstory. He has a whole lineage, guys.
And then he just got like sniped out of the air by Apollo. It's like, I
mean, getting sniped out of the air by Apollo is what happens to the best of us.
It happens to the best of us.
Including Patroclus.
Alright. No! Not Patroclus. Speaking of Patroclus, our next star-studded hero.
I like how we didn't even describe Achilles or go over any of his story.
Oh, that's right. Okay, we'll include Achilles in the Patroclus section because really he's the important character here. So Patroclus, however you want to say it.
No, it's only Patroclus.
You're
the authority now.
You're an authority. You say only Patroclus.
I own Greece.
You own Greece and all pronunciations of the words.
Disclaimer, I do not actually own Greece. All jokes about owning Greece.
I mean, you are the Olympiad in this Olympiad. Which is the... Name spending, guys, name spending.
I can't wait to send this to just have him edit out.
He's gonna have such a good time. No, I keep all of it in. I know you're hearing this in the editing room in the future. Keep it all in. Or, I don't know. Imagine he just, like, splices every word and just makes a totally different story.
That's a YTP.
Exactly. We could just doing that. Okay, characters in the Trojan War. Patroclus. We'll come back to Achilles, because most of the Trojan War is just Achilles shenanigans anyway. Or at least, sort of. What's some Patroclus information you got here?
I mean, Patroclus is, like, main defining role in the story is the way he dies.
It's just being dead?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. He had nine dogs. He had nine dogs? He had 9 dogs.
Where was that inclusion in the Song of Achilles?
It was not there, which has always made me salty. He had 9 dogs.
That is kind of sick. I think that's very accurate to some of his vibes, though. It's like everyone's like... See, because I've been playing Hades, right?
Yeah.
Because we're nerds.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm also still recovering from the Song of Achilles 2 years after I first read it. Part of, like, that, you know, all those things is, like, all these Greek soldiers are like, haha, we're buff and we love murder. And Patroclus is just like, I like vibing and thriving.
I mean, he also likes murder. Like, in the actual Illiad, he's rather bloodthirsty when he goes out dressed in Achilles' armor. He kills a fair amount of people before he dies.
Fair enough, but I always assumed that was just, like, you know, gotta put it on the character, because for some reason he's dressed up like Achilles anyway.
Method acting?
I know, like, I listened to an interview from Madeline Miller, and she was talking about how she thought it was kind of sick that Patroclus was, like, the sweet Greek, apparently, and everyone, like, described him as, like, he wasn't as bloodthirsty as the rest of us. Which, like...
That's kind of like being the tallest
dwarf. But in Greek mythology standards, we kind of have to give them some.
It's also like leeway. Being the smartest man in the Greek army, which is also what we know of Odysseus is not that indicative of your actual intelligence
or your ability to know things.
Yes,
but in terms of like attempting to not have everyone just be absolute barbarians, we have to try to attempt to be like, well, okay, they're all absolute maniacs, but
Patroclus does have some things going for him. For example, he respects women, from what we know. Because, like,
from what we know,
the whole thing with, like, Briseis, right, was that she got along surprisingly well with them, despite the power imbalance between her as a supposed sex slave.
Yeah.
Where, like, it got to the point where Patroclus, when he died, she went to Achilles, and she was, apparently Patroclus had, like, promised her that he'd make Achilles marry her to, like, save her status and stuff. So,
which is honestly kind of sweet, and also to a degree, it's like we gotta address the fact Achilles Patroclus deeply in love, deeply sad.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of just eternal sadness. You know. That's probably why Briseis was chilling a little bit. It's like logistically speaking, all these other like slaves just like not having a good time, and then it's like.
I mean, like she's just kind of there,
and
like,
she just.
she's not even really being used for most of it because they're using each other.
Because they're just. No, that's
school appropriate podcast.
We are school appropriate. They're having a good time, so she gets to have a good time.
Which is like not to excuse slavery, you know? This is not a slavery apologist.
Disclaimer: slavery bad.
Achilles is very much a problematic fave for multiple reasons.
Yeah,
like murder, the slavery thing,
murder and slavery.
Yeah,
just not vibes.
We are not saying that a poor little meow meows deserve to be like forgiven. You know? These are very problematic people, which is like a great part of Greek mythology because like Western media nowadays is oftentimes simplified, I think, to like very black and white, good and bad. Yeah, but all of these people are very messed up, and they are all trying their best.
Yeah. I think it's important to explain that when we say we love Greek mythology and are memeing on all these people and talking about our faves, it's not that we don't acknowledge that a lot of what comes from the story and, like, a lot of these stories and their, like, inherentness to them, like, a lot of the it's a very different time and a very different kind of story. You know, it's a very... We have to acknowledge both that these things... We should acknowledge both these things are not good and are not having a good time. You know, and the people in these... How do I say these with correct English?
We acknowledge the problematic behavior of the people featured in these stories, and we're not saying that, you know, just because... We are not condoning any of their behavior.
Yes. We want all of it to be known, you know? We don't want people to be like, oh my gosh, there was nothing wrong. Because, you know, it's good to... These stories are a part of history, and also, it's good to know that.
Keep in mind that all of the people within these mythologies are not real, you know?
Yes.
They're completely fictional. I had a friend who was not aware the Trojan War was not real, and that was a little awkward, but be aware these are not real people. Yeah. We are not actually supporting historical figures who lived and breathed.
Yeah.
These are completely...
Nor the ideas of actual people who were living in that time. You know, Greek times were not necessarily pro-vibes. Yes. They were different than our times in a lot of weird ways. Yes. You know, and it's not stuff that...
Somehow we took the sexism, but then didn't keep the... But then also invented homophobia?
Like, wait a minute, that's not the best of both worlds. This is not Liv and Maddie. But, yeah, so now with all that, as we understand that, you know, we are going on a journey that takes us to dark, dangerous places that we do not necessarily condone. Or, not necessarily, we don't condone. We've gotten to 2 characters.
We haven't gone to 2 characters. Well, we kind of made really silly references to 2 characters.
yeah, okay. But Achilles, main character. Let's recap our 2 characters. I swear, we'll figure this out. Achilles, golden princess man, beautiful, the best of the Greeks, the strongest of the Greeks, the edgiest of the Greeks.
There's like a common myth where he was like invulnerable except for his heel, which is why we have the whole Achilles heel thing.
Yeah,
but that is fanon. It was not in the original Illiad.
I don't remember where that was. I was trying to I know that Renaissance art likes doing random stuff.
I think like people after Homer just like created it because they were like, oh, Achilles is so cool. He has to be invulnerable. I mean, it was like a myth inside the Iliad where other people would see Achilles and consider him to be invulnerable because of how fast and how good at fighting he was, and like what a skilled soldier he was. But he was not actually dipped into the sticks by his mother like a French fry into oil.
Or at least not actually in the sense that it's not canon in the Iliad. But like we say, most like some of my favorite parts of Greek mythology are canon.
That's true.
You know, everything is as authentic as anything is because, you know, this was still quite a bit of time ago. But I'll say one of the interesting thing about that is the heel thing kind of I had this big old cardboard book as a child, you know, Greek myths, and it's like Greek myths for babies, right? You know, and I was reading through it, you know, and there's the section on the Iliad, or at least like on Achilles' heel, and it seemed when they wrote this story that the metaphor of Achilles was like, even if you think you're real strong, you have your one weakness and you gotta protect
hubris?
Well, it wasn't even about his hubris, it's just like, you know, he thought he was so cool because his heel was invincible, but then they shot his heel. Sort of like
the toxic masculinity awarding.
The toxic masculinity award. You know, but like the actual story of the Iliad is more about how Achilles rages through the Trojan army like at the very last second because he's just so sad.
Yeah, the real Achilles heel, the metaphorical Achilles heel is Patroclus.
Yes.
Because losing him is what destroyed him.
You know, and it basically caused him to like run out, you know, he actually, interesting story, we all are sort of familiar with the Achilles heel and Achilles dying, but he doesn't actually die in the Iliad.
Yeah, he dies much later.
You know, and he doesn't even really die, like, ceremoniously, just kind of, like...
He really tries to die. He's very sad up until the end.
He's what we call not having a vibe and good times. You know, like, there is a question that we can ask ourselves about, like, erasure, and it's like, wait a minute, why are you removing the, like, most important part of the story?
The Iliad is essentially about loss and how nobody really wins a war.
Yeah.
Right? Like, between Achilles losing Patroclus and, what's his name? It's not Priam. Priam is Achilles' dad.
Oh, that's right. Hector's dad. Prius?
Wait.
Paris? No, Paris is that dingbat. We'll get back to Paris. We've gotten to two. Oh my gosh, hold on.
Is Priam? No, Priam is Achilles' dad, right?
Let me see. Hold on.
I remember the queen's name, but not the king's.
The Queen of Troy?
Yeah, Hecuba.
I don't think I ever even remember that. Fascinating stuff. But let's see.
Hector's father.
Hector had I think one of them was Priam. I know that.
Yeah, but was it Achilles' dad or Hector's dad?
All these guys have the same name. For all the joking I'm making about how everyone's name is just their name and their dad, well, we don't remember. Let's see. Come on, Google. Work with me.
We're such a valid source.
We are a valid source. Don't worry, SparkNotes has the character list for us. We're still on the Greeks, guys. Don't worry. Anyway, other characters, because, like, here's the thing. We've gotten to, like, our main boys, and, like, they're the metaphorical section, almost.
Yeah.
Or at least, like...
I mean, like, Achilles, Patroclus, and then Hector and his wife, basically, is...
You know.
This story of, like, you know, war, loss, nobody wins, meaningless conflict. It kind of, foreshadows, World War I. It's basically...
a deep foreshadowing to the vibes in World War I.
Eventually, they realized they fought over nothing, right? Because fighting over one woman, in very much the same way that the World War I was sparked by the death of one man, was completely meaningless in the end. Nobody really won. They just all lost so much. And they, like, entered the war really optimistically, thinking they would just find glory and fame. And then it took so long and so many lives, and by the end, nobody was happy. Which really is just, like, ominous, and so clearly parallels World War I, that I feel like if, what's his name? The guy who made the whole alliance system.
Franz Ferdinand. Well, he was the reason why they all...
No, the O guy, the German guy who made the alliance system.
I don't know, World War I history. I'm too busy learning Greek mythology and not having my computer loaded.
I knew this. Was it a B name? If he had read the Iliad, World War I could have been avoided, because the entire fault that like spiral from Helen to being this huge war was because they made this alliance system. But because Odysseus made an alliance system with all the princes who wanted to marry Helen before she got married, and thinking this would end conflict, thinking this would prevent conflict from happening, and it essentially ultimately made it so that this conflict spiraled out of control because all these princes had to join into the war effort.
Yeah. It's fascinating that it's like this allegory, considering that like it's so far removed from any of those actual events. Like the Iliad, unless Homer was some like
It's because
strange
history
god.
repeats itself.
Well, yeah. It's fascinating that this one of the most famous stories of all time is this very sort of anti-war story, in the sense that it's very much like look at the
devastation.
unless it's a very advanced form of anti-womenness, which we can't knock out initially, but it is fascinating that there's this sort of like very anti-war take and like the suffering of war, and I don't necessarily think it's anti-alliance, more like anti.
Right, but
glory.
It's just funny that it completely warned everyone of this danger of creating these webs of alliances that was then completely ignored.
Yeah.
And then it went down the exact path that they warned us of.
Yeah. It is interesting, but all I'll say is like I can't necessarily say it's anti-alliance in the idea that like it's not necessarily bad that all these guys were like, you just kidnapped Helen. That's uncool.
Right.
I feel like while it's anti-war, it's not necessarily like, how do I say this? It's anti-war in the way that like, it's like these people all meet their ends at the end of war. This war is ultimately pointless. This is the story of Helen of Troy. It is why Greece is called Hellas to like them, and we just call it Greece because of some silly Roman guy a long time ago. But like, this is the story of Greeks' first unity, and I think to a sense it was supposed to be this idea that it could actually be used to create like a unified kind of Greek society, Like Greece wouldn't become like unified really in any like significant sense for a while, but
I mean it wasn't it wasn't real though. It didn't happen.
It did not happen, but I'm trying to imagine what else, like what is happening right now, Because while the alliance system could ultimately be like teamed up to the idea of like World War II or World War I, I don't necessarily think that both like alliances are necessarily bad,
right.
Or it's like I'd say probably the bigger like problem is the war complex itself. It's like why when we have problems must we go to war? Or, like, why are wars seemingly always fought for these, like, giant superpowers to, like, duke it out on the stage while, like, regular people are just kind of dying and starving, Those are some interesting other questions we can ask ourselves.
Yes.
But, okay. Now that we've gotten into the deep talk, we'll get back to the silly goofiness. Actually, we won't. We are sporadic like that. Okay, so we got into Achilles, we got into Patroclus. Agamemnon! My boy!
We didn't even... Okay. Yes, okay.
Oh my gosh.
Agamemnon.
We have...
Agamemnon is like your boss that you don't like. He's like the entitled customer in fast food.
He's such a Karen. Agamemnon is... Okay, so you've read Electra. I've not yet read Electra, but I know...
Electra. It was so good.
I'm almost getting to it. It's a bit of a break. I'll get there, I promise. But I do know the Agamemnon tales, because he is the most Agamemnon.
This Agamemnon is made of Agamemnon.
This Agamemnon is made. Like we can have all these talks about like the depths and the complexities of wars and alliances and fighting for glory, even though war is fundamental in glory and the beauty of life and love and all. We can have all these deep talks and the metaphors. But if you want us to speak logistically, the war could have been solved if someone just clocked Agamemnon in the face and then he passed out for the rest of time.
Or Paris, if they clocked Paris in the face.
Yeah, if someone on the Trojan, we don't get to see much of the Trojan side, but if someone on the Trojan side was just like, Paris,
stop.
Why'd you kidnap her? Why'd you do that?
I mean, but then again, we don't really know what Helen's thought.
That is one of the things.
Because if she truly loved Paris, which we don't know if she did, right? Like, we have no idea what her reaction was to all of this. Because we only hear of her. And she has, one scene in the entirety of it. Near the very end.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that even in the Iliad, or is it in
I know that we get I know in the Odyssey, Telemachus is like, I'm on my adventure quest to find my dad.
Yeah.
And then he goes to Menelaus and Helen, who are like vibing, and is like, and they're like, well, you know, he's like, let me tell you. Menelaus is like, I saw him leave Troy, and that's all I know.
Right.
You know, and there's like a scene. I will have to get to my reading of actual historical texts at some point, but I know that occurs in the Odyssey.
Yeah,
so
Helen is very interesting because we just don't see her opinion. I think near the end of the Iliad, she has this one scene where like the Trojan horse gets wheeled in, right?
Yeah.
And Cassandra is freaking out. Everyone is like, it's fine. And then Helen goes around this horse, mimicking the voices of the wives of the soldiers inside.
Which is honestly kind of a skill, if you could say that.
It's very surprising. And it's also extremely interesting, right? Because it's like, there's multiple things to be wondered here. Like, on a logical level, why does she know what all these people's wives sound like?
It's like,
but
well, she all met them at white camp, you know.
But Greek
they're also all her sisters.
Greek mythology is often meant to be taken more metaphorically than literally. So in this sense, Helen represents everything they want, right? Helen is more of a representation than a real person, where she is sort of just like a symbol of the domestic sphere, where it's like, you know, love, kindness, and warmth.
Yeah.
Everything these people want.
You know.
So thinking of her kidnapping in that sense, it's more like Troy stole
Greece's soul or something.
Like the prosperity from Greece, and they're all fighting over prosperity rather than one woman.
Like a person, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say mythology has an interesting way of representing women as like characters. You know,
they usually don't.
You know, yeah, as like full realized humans, because I don't think Greek society was very much like, wait, women have ideas. Women?
Sparta was pretty good at that. Athens was not, though.
Yeah, and Athens was the second.
Athens is the one that writes everything, so...
Why?
Stuck with that.
Why?
Because Spartans are too busy fighting
They were too busy respecting women to write things.
Yeah.
But... No, Helen is also a spirit in all these things. It's fascinating that she's sort of this complicated... I know that in the Iliad she has a couple of these, like, scenes where, like, Aphrodite is, like, messing around with her and Paris. She's, like... Aphrodite's, like, hovering over them and being like, smooch! And then, like, she's like, no! And then Paris is like, yes! And then, you know, they have this weird triangle of shenanigans in which it seems like Helen does not reciprocate his affections. But there's also a sense that, like, she does, or, you know, she, like, there are interpretations that, like, she does reciprocate his affections, or it's more complicated and she doesn't necessarily feel excited to go back to Menelaus, or... I don't know. It's weird. The way she, you know, like, on one hand, she can be very, like, pro-Greece, and on the other hand, she can be like, I'm trying to get you out of this horse. By mimicking all of my sisters who are all of your wives.
She doesn't actually have that many sisters, disclaimer. She has one sister who's Clytemnestra.
She's Clytemnestra, and then...
Oh, wait, no, they do have multiple sisters, I think.
Clytemnestra, and then Phoebe? Was it Phoebe or Penelope?
Penelope is her cousin.
Penelope's her cousin. She's got people she's related to.
She's related to multiple people, but not all of the wives.
She's not all.
But it does make
wives.
sense that she could mimic Penelope's voice because they were cousins, and Clytemnestra was her sister, and Clytemnestra is incredible.
We do love Clytemnestra.
She cut her husband's head off with an axe.
Yeah.
Her husband is Agamemnon, for context.
Her husband is Agamemnon, and like. Okay, Agamemnon, right? He sucked. Most of the problems of the Greek War could have been solved if Agamemnon just didn't suck. Like, he was just like, I'm taking Briseis. And then Achilles was like, literally, why?
I think Agamemnon represents, in a, like, very obvious sense, abuse of power. Because he spends the entire time sort of sabotaging his own side for the sake of appeasing his own ego.
Yeah. Yep.
And he's also just sort of an awful person, which is saying a lot if we're considering how awful most, if not all, of these people are.
He's, like, objectively the worst guy in the Greek army. to a certain degree, and like that's saying something because these guys are not like choir boys.
None of these people are saints. Because he spends the entire time just being an awful leader and an ineffective leader, right?
And making choices that nobody understands.
He is simultaneously a tyrant and also just awful at being a tyrant. Because sometimes you have a leader who, like, overextends their power, right? They're taking control of everything. They don't give anyone choices, but then they're effective at it. You know, they win wars quickly. They lead and, though they do many human rights abuses, they achieve their goal. Agamemnon is not like that. Agamemnon is awful in every sense, where he's not effective, he's not a good leader, and he's also an awful person.
And just so Agamemnon. One of the things I was thinking about is, like, most Greek story tales are kind of like fairy tales in the sense that they're supposed to be like warnings, in a sense. That's why most Greek kings are just like, it's like, you hear about that guy? He did some really dumb stuff, and so we...
King Midas, cough, cough, King Midas.
King Midas had, like, apparently the worst of the problems. Like, you see this sucker, and you see that forest that was, like, sacred to Demeter, do not cut down trees.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy was, like, cut downing the trees, and then he ate himself to death.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, like, a warning, like, hey, don't touch the trees.
Yeah.
You know, I like to imagine in some ways, even though it's, like, much more tragic, because we kind of care about the people who Agamemnon is needlessly destroying the lives of, you know? Like, it's kind of sad that, like, yes, Achilles should not have rage quit the war just because Agamemnon was bullying him, because Agamemnon was bullying everyone. But, like, if Agamemnon just literally did any other choice but, like, spite Apollo, you know?
And consistently spite literally everyone.
Like, literally everyone in the war, then people wouldn't have died. But it's partially his ego, and partially, I think, one of these, like, stories about the folly of, like, being a complete moron.
I think it's his hubris. I think he's honestly very insecure. Because the people he spites are always ones that potentially have more power than him. Like, Apollo is a god, right? And he spites the priest of Apollo because he wants to assert his own power. And then he spites Achilles, who is the most powerful soldier in his army. So I think he's very, like, insecure about his own position, which might come from the fact that he was, like, banished from his own kingdom when he was a child by his uncle who killed his father.
Very Hamlet of him.
Like, I feel like he's just never secure in his own power, and he tries to reassure himself by abusing it, by, like, asserting himself over other people in very needless ways.
I mean, yeah, and it's definitely a tale, like, even though, like, everyone crashes along the way to Agamemnon's journey, he eventually does crumble, you know? Like, Agamemnon is punished by being axe-murdered by his wife.
For murdering their daughter.
And I assume other, like a pile-on of other, like, karmic justice that was in there. You know, but then in the Oresteres, which is after the Trojan War, she is punished for murdering her husband. You know, and that's sort of like a Greek take of, like...
I'm not sure she's punished.
Well,
I think she was killed, but then her son was punished for killing her. So I don't think she was... I don't think it was a justice thing.
Wasn't Oresteres, though, like, being coerced by the gods, being like, hey...
No,
Or did he just feel like, darn.
He knew his father died by his mother's hand, so he grew up, and then he came back to the kingdom, like, Menaice? I can't pronounce.
I know...
Menaice.
Well, we'll say it's that one.
Yeah. And his sister, who was very fond of her memories of their father, was like, you have to avenge your father.
I
right?
see.
And there was news from Odysseus, who had, like, spread all his travel stories that Agamemnon was still in the underworld being really salty about his murder. So then Orestes was eventually convinced to go murder his mother. And immediately he was punished.
Yeah.
Because murdering your mother is generally not a great thing to do.
Even Greek society is like, don't kill your mom. Okay.
So this puts Clytemnestra in a really interesting position where the gods didn't really see it fit to punish her. Like, it's seen as her killing Agamemnon is almost a justice thing, while her being killed is a tragic thing.
That makes more sense. But then Orsari still wins in the end. So it's a complicated. The Agamemnon family tree is feeling something, as we say. But it is a whole tale. It is an interesting one, at least.
Agamemnon's entire family is sort of cursed to continually kill their own blood.
Just really not have a good time.
Yeah.
You know, unless you're like on the Helen and Menelaus side, which is actually just kind of
I think it's I think the reason Menelaus wasn't affected by it is because Agamemnon just took the entirety of the curse. Because
just absorbed that nonsense.
Like Agamemnon's family just collapses, and like sure, Menelaus had to go without his wife for 10 years, but then she just returned, and they still had a happy family.
Relatively speaking, yeah.
With their eldest daughter, and everything was just fine after that.
Mm-hmm.
While Agamemnon's side just continued to kill themselves.
Just keep vibing.
Kill each other.
Man, look at these great transitions. Menelaus! our next boy of the Trojan War. Perhaps on the table of the least bad of people, and luckily for us, does not get brutally murdered, from my accounts.
Yeah, you know? He doesn't get brutally.
He actually kind of gets what he wants and is having a good time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The only guy who really has necessarily a stake, other than this alliance system.
We know why he's fighting.
He's like, my wife's been kidnapped, we've got to go fight the Trojans.
He's not after this for glory the way Agamemnon is, and he's not after it for power the same way Agamemnon is.
He's not Agamemnon.
He wants his wife back.
He's like the good second child Agamemnon can never be. But... And it's like, he doesn't know things. Like, at the beginning of the Iliad, right, there's the scene where,
There's a choosing the suitor scene.
There's the choosing the suitor scene. No, not in the Iliad. That's at, like, the beginning of, like, the Song of Achilles.
That's not...
There's an armistice between the two armies, right? And the people are like, hey, guys, maybe it was Odysseus. Someone had a genius plan. And they're like, dude, Menelaus is here, Paris is here. Why don't they just duke it out? And then whoever wins, and then we all get to go home.
Right.
And then everyone was like, this is a genius idea. And Menelaus was like, let's go. You know, and it was very chill until, like, Paris almost died, and then Aphrodite was like...
Oh, yeah, Aphrodite had to rescue him.
She had to go, like, suck him away.
Which is, objectively, they should have just tried it again. Like, the second Paris was okay again. They should have just been like, okay, it's rematch time.
On top of the Trojan War being, like, a culmination of people's terrible choices, because those people are Agamemnon, it's also a tale of the gods just being bullies.
It's a tale of Aphrodite specifically being bullied.
Just Aphrodite bullying just everyone.
It's like, if we take it as her being symbolic for love, right?
Yeah.
It's more like, you know, this specific emotion, love, is causing them suffering. Which does go along with the plot of the Iliad, right? Because grief, like Achilles' grief and Andromeda's grief, is all a result of losing the people they love. And it could be argued that, you know, and she directly initiates the war with Paris falling in love with Helen and taking her away.
You know, and that is so interesting. It is
metaphors.
It's like a big old metaphor for don't love people. But like, I think it's sort of very similar to some of the ways that the Greeks interpreted love as like this sort of like this sickness. You got shot by Cupid arrow. You can't control yourself. It's like you're running around like a madman.
Right. It's like a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
In Greek mythology, typically.
You know, and it's the idea that it causes this whole war. Like, this war wasn't started over glory or conquest or, you know, like, bullying. Well, you won't start over bullying, but over the... like, fundamentally, it starts over the idea of Menelaus, and Menelaus, you know, it started with the concept of love, you know, like, the concept of, like, you've lost someone you love, you care about someone you love, and most of the actions are encouraged by, like, you know, losing people as opposed to being like, well, you know... The Iliad actually has this very sort of somber tale, which I think we can kind of ending, which we can kind of get to when we eventually get to the story of it. But Menelaus, I appreciate him, and as far as I know, he hasn't caused any significant crimes. You know, and he is probably the only person who makes sense for why he's doing what he's doing.
Right, like he's the most understandable one. My voice probably did not catch that.
Yeah.
Okay. He has the most understandable motive here.
And he ultimately is the only one who really wins out of this situation. Because as we will find out, post-Trojan War and furthermore, most of the heroes we talk about in this tale do not turn out well.
Do not make it.
Do not have a good old time, as we say. Okay, so let's see. Next up on our list. So we've gotten the Spartan kings, Agamemnon, Menelaus.
Do we have to talk about Odysseus?
We will have to talk about Odysseus.
We will have to talk. He's like an anti-Blorbo to me.
Oh yes, Odysseus.
See, my main qualm comes from the mass misinterpretation, as I see it, of his character. So, like in 9th grade in English class, we had to go over the Odyssey, right?
Yeah.
I had some qualms with my teacher's interpretation of Odysseus specifically, because I don't see... Odysseus is a very flawed person. Everyone sees him as, like, super smart because the narrative tells us he is smart. But he constantly gets bailed out by Athena. None of his good ideas are his. And he has significant anger issues that causes his whole quest to derail several times, right? He's a very problematic protagonist, which would be fine if people acknowledged his problematic traits.
So we're here to acknowledge Odysseus' problematic traits. I'll say I'll slightly differ on the pure rage, because, okay, if Aphrodite is like a metaphor for all the love that people make decisions for, then I could partially see the idea of Athena being a method of him getting bailed out by all his cleverness, you know?
That's true.
And while it's kind of silly to him to be like, I am the smartest of the Greeks, and then, like, Athena's just like, but actually, you know.
Yeah.
I'll say, what fascinates me about Odysseus is that, one, he actually, depending on what you're reading, his ending is actually confusing to me. Because it's post-Odyssey, like, the Odyssey ends on, like, a high note, and then, like, post-Odyssey is apparently some very confusing events. But...
I've never read post-Odyssey stuff.
I have not either, because nobody has, because it's missing. All we have is a summary.
No!
You read Circe, though.
Yeah.
You got to the end of Circe.
I love Circe.
Those events were she changed those events a little bit, and it was kind of like that, which is just like a little bit confusing in terms of that.
Right. No. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Know.
Where like his son from Circe comes back, kills him on accident, and then
some. I guess Circe is like, Telemachus. That's the guy. We'll get to Telemachus, but I'll say what's interesting about him is he is. So, hubris is the Greeks' favorite tale. It's like, you don't ever have hubris, you know?
Right.
Hubris, mistake. Always not have that,
That's the most common, like, fatal flaw of heroes.
You know, and hubris is Odysseus' flaw, but it's interesting how he is very different in it. It comes to him very differently than it comes to all the rest of the characters, you know? Because he is also kind of clever. You know, he is considered the smartest of the Greeks. He is considered... I'm sorry. As we understand him, you know, he also goes through, like, several decades of needless suffering. Partially his fault, partially just sort of like a metaphor for the pain and suffering we put ourselves
He has,
through.
like, so much pride because he, like, escapes the Cyclops Island, right? And then he has to brag about it. And if he hadn't, he would be sailing home. But since he does, the Cyclops curses him, and then Poseidon sends another storm to make him, to blow him off course again.
He's like, psych, the next decade is going to be rough on you, man, dude.
Because, so we can see Athena as, like, more of a metaphorical, like, figure of intellect rather than an actual person. And in that sense, Odysseus is book smart, but he is
clever, but he is not
brags
wise.
too much, and he thinks too highly of himself. I think he thinks himself above consequence a little too much. He also, in the Odyssey, he constantly kind of, like, looks down on his crew as, like, lesser than him. And whenever they make a mistake, he gets extremely angry.
Yeah.
He doesn't communicate well.
He is not a very good leader. No, and it's some fascinating stuff in there. Like, Odysseus, he has this hubris not because he is strong, like, say, Achilles, or, like, or the king, like Agamemnon, but because he is clever, and that within itself is demonstrated as a weakness, you know? Like, the gods all punish him for things that he is doing, like sort of being a dingus and sacrificing golden cows or revealing your real name to the Cyclopses, you know, and it's the first instance ever known of a high intelligent, low wisdom built character.
High and low whiz.
High and low whiz, you know. But what he does say in the Trojan War is very different than what he does in the Odyssey. The Odyssey is mostly him running around being like, why does this keep happening to me? And then being like, wait a minute.
Causing it to happen again, you know, to himself.
Like, but Odysseus, while being an absolute dingus, does fit one of my favorite tropes, which is two geniuses who are married to each other. Because we all forget about Penelope, but she's
Penelope
also
is very smart.
Very intelligent. Possibly, I was having this conversation with somebody, it might have been you, but the idea of Greek suitors within themselves are sort of like this, like one of the great monsters of Greek mythology, you know?
Honestly, yeah. I mean, there's multiple of them. It's a hard target to hit. And
there's multiple of them. They don't listen. They're all dinguses, and they're willing to sacrifice their life for needlessly nothing. And it's just an absolute pain. Like, we see instances of tragic Greek suitordom in basically any story where there's a woman who needs to get married. You know, like Atalanta, we see it with Penelope, we see it with Psyche, those...
We almost saw it with Helen, but then Odysseus came in.
Oh my gosh, the Trojan War is just Greek suitors, but with character development.
The Trojan War is Greek suitors without character development.
Just with names.
Yeah.
But, you know, but Penelope is fighting this beast, which is called the male unmarried population of Ithaca. Otherwise known as the Great Greek Suitor Tragedy. And she has this whole conspiracy where she's just like, no, I have to do my funeral vows. And then, like...
so she, like, has this weaving that she has to get done.
And she just...
mourn Odysseus is basically what she's saying. She thinks Odysseus will come back for her. So she just continuously weaves it and unweaves it secretly at night so she can buy herself more time.
Yeah.
And since none of these suitors have ever touched a loom because they're all too manly, they never catch on.
Yeah. This is actually a metaphor for why you should learn domestic household chores.
Yes.
No matter your race or gender or whatever.
Race?
I don't know why I put race in there. No matter your gender, learn how to cook. Because then you'll lose out on the suitor wars.
When you bid for a woman's hand in marriage, be sure you know how to weave.
Be sure you know what weaving patterns are. But she's, you know, Penelope, very clever, big brains. That's part of the reason she married. She got this conspiracy with Odysseus during the Helen, like, initial thing where she was, you know. It was like... There's, like, a couple things in marriage. Like, Odysseus is a dingus, but I do love the idea of two geniuses just being like, haha,
we are
get
geniuses.
wrecked.
There is the double standard where she, like, continuously, you know, finds a way to avoid the advances of the suitors while Odysseus constantly sleeps with other women.
Yeah.
But...
she's keeping part of this marriage.
Yeah, she is keeping her marriage.
And at the same time,
vows.
in Greek mythology, it's not necessarily seen as the same thing. Like, what's interesting about, to the Greeks, okay, you know, a man sleeping with a woman sleeping with a man were two different things, even though, logistically speaking, they're not. Like, that's why...
It takes two to tango.
It's like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
But, for example, if a man is caught adultering, he just has to pay a fine. This was sort of Athens rules.
Right, yeah.
Whereas a woman, if she was caught adultering, her husband got the chance to axe murder her and the guy she was sleeping with.
Right.
Which, logistically, I'm not sure how that worked out.
Clytemnestra did the opposite.
Which is fascinating, because that's axe murder.
Gender stereotypes.
Clytemnestra was breaking gender stereotypes and rules. We call her an iconic queen. But there's, like, the standard, right? Like, well, it's like, Odysseus, what the heck are you doing? Your beautiful, wonderful wife is waiting for you. Mm-hmm. And she's also, let's not forget she was, like, running Ithaca for, like, several decades.
Right. While also fending off all these suitors and doing customer service, basically 24/7.
It's like, we love Penelope, you know? If you're like, wow, I wish I had an unproblematic Odysseus, then just stan Penelope.
Stan Penelope.
Just spend your time standing Penelope. But, yeah, she had all of these schemes, and in Greek society it's considered different. Like her off-putting suitors is like a good moral thing,
Yes.
and then Odysseus sleeping with women is not seen as like a bad thing.
The way it's worded in the Odyssey is also seen as like he was forced to do it.
It's like
Odysseus, aren't you smart? Can't you think a way out of this? Like, Penelope is thinking a way out of this. She is getting her life threatened, and she's thinking a way out of it.
He didn't know how to weave. He had no other methods.
He's just not a girl boss.
Just not a girl boss. He gets trapped on Circe's island. But Odysseus, he is fascinating to me. I find him, he's so weird and so bad, but also so strange in different ways. Like, perhaps it's just because I relate to the idea of failing by pretending to be too smart or thinking that I know things more than I fail to, like...
The imposter syndrome.
You know? Like, to a certain weird way, I can understand Odysseus' struggles more than I can understand, like, Agamemnon's struggles, because with him, I'm just just don't make bad choices. But with Odysseus, I'm like, yeah, I've made a mistake that I've regretted and now have to suffer the consequences of. You know? Perhaps this is why he fascinates me. But he's still a dingus, but he's the smartest dingus. Okay, we are almost done with the Greek side, and then I think we can, like, split, like, the Romans, not the Romans.
The Romans!
Excuse me, I got a little too ahead of ourselves here. The Trojans! The Trojans next. Okay, we got Odysseus.
Diomedes. Diomedes is like a watered down Odysseus. Well, he's kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. He's like just there. He has a really interesting relationship with Odysseus.
Yeah. I like how they're different kinds of smart, in a sense, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
he's like also Athena's favorite. Which is like, he's also, you know, he possesses an amount of intellect, but he's also just more forgettable than Odysseus.
Yeah, I think just because he doesn't get his own spin-off show.
He doesn't get his own spin-off.
And he dies tragically, if I remember correctly.
Wait, he died?
I think he's one of the ones, well, he didn't die in the war, wait, hold on. Diomedes.
See, this is
where we're
This is representative of how Diomedes is kind of forgettable.
You know? Like, we sort of don't have the biggest perspective of him, because he kind of just, like, pops off a little bit and then yells, but he doesn't do anything specifically, like...
Yeah, he's, like, the second smartest guy, so everyone forgets about him.
Yeah. Which honestly might work out better for him.
Yeah.
Logistically speaking. But he's a fun guy. I want to acknowledge him and his violence that he rages... He, like, punches two gods in the face. And just causes a lot of blood while Achilles is taking his big old war nap.
Oh my
God.
God.
I think
I think he does cool things, but then it completely gets overshadowed by, like, Achilles at the end. Like, every single cool thing he does, someone else does it, but cooler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we want to acknowledge Diomedes because he is here, he does exist in this book, and he is part of why they didn't all die immediately.
Right.
The Amazons were in the war?
Yeah, like, near the very end, after the Iliad, in the after Iliad, the Amazons showed up briefly, and Achilles was like, okay, now kill me, but then he kills the leader of them really quickly. And then everyone's just like, oh.
Oh no.
Yeah.
They had games at Achilles' funeral. I'm just reading through Wikipedia. I'm like, this is incredible. After the fall of Troy, he
also, like, he had a really brief moment where he was like, oh my... Like, after he killed her, right, he went after her, he took her helmet off, and then he had this really weird moment where he was like, oh my god, she's so pretty. We could have had a life together. Which is very strange. It was not written by Homer, and it reads kind of like a self-insert. Because everyone just wants to ship themselves with Achilles.
Just like, oh boy.
This is my OC. She's the leader of the Amazons. She's
it's
also
like, look,
pretty enough that Achilles forgets his entire thing, which, like,
it's
is
like,
mourning his boyfriend.
I'm sorry. Achilles is taken and currently deeply sad.
Yeah. He just gets snapped out of his depression by this beauty and then immediately
like,
gets
oh
depressed
dang,
again.
beautiful woman, I wish I knew that. If only I had tried that before, then I wouldn't be sad over Patroclus.
Oh.
Don't worry, Achilles. You're forever sad over Patroclus in our hearts. I'm reading through the Wikipedia of Diomedes. He has this crazy life that he, like, becomes a Roman or something.
What?
We'll come back to Diomedes. He's forgettable, but I feel like he could be interesting, considering all of
I'm
this.
sure Diomedes is someone's fave.
Diomedes, I feel like you sent me like a test of like Greek characters.
Yeah.
Was I Diomedes?
You were Diomedes.
Okay, so that's
sick. I think he goes home happy.
You know what? I'll take that Diomedes pathway. Be kind of smart and not the worst.
I got Achilles, which is, interesting. It says certain things.
You're just raging all the time.
I'm tragic.
Like I said, multi-talented. The best of the Greeks. Oh, glorious. Okay, we are chowing through the Greeks. Here's a bunch of these other guys we don't care about.
Ajax.
The Ajaxes.
Ajax too.
Yeah, the Ajaxes are there. We want you to know the Ajaxes were there.
They're buff.
They're buff. They're both named Ajax.
They're just not as good as Achilles at killing people.
And I know in the story Ajax, one of them dies terribly, or maybe one of them dies in war.
I'm sure one of them does die.
They're the Ajaxes. You know them.
They're just kind of there. They're like when you make a D&D group and there's just a random barbarian. Yeah.
They're just there to be the random barbarians, and they rage when they need to. Let's see. Is Cassandra on the Trojan side?
Cassandra is a Trojan.
She is Trojan.
Yeah, she's literally Paris's sister.
Ooh.
And Hector's sister, because Paris and Hector are brothers.
True. Wait a minute. Get to the Romans. Okay, Nestor.
I do not remember Nestor.
Nestor's speeches are sometimes long-winded. Citation, Spark Notes. We got Menelaus, these suckers, let's see. This guy, Pallas. We'll go him, because I think he's the last important guy anyway.
I don't remember.
Pallas is Achilles' father. Priam is Hector's father.
Hector's. Oh, I'm so glad we finally figured
it out. Let's go.
Both of their names start with P, so in my head they just kind of mixed.
They're both dads.
They're both dads, and they're both sad.
They're both sad dads
because their sons die.
Because their sons die. So, Pallas, he is not actually in the story. But
he's not even in the war. He's way back in just a kingdom and being like, oh, I guess my son is out there being the best of the Greeks. Out
there being the coolest Greek man. I will say about Pallas is usually in these stories it's like some random, just like man god saw a woman and was like, time to get spited. Time to get raged on. And then there we go, new heroes. New hero just dropped. But Pallas is almost the opposite of that, in which it's like the well, we'll get to the gods. I think we're gonna have to do one episode on the Greeks, because this has already been an hour.
Yeah, the gods were like, Zeus originally wanted to marry Thetis, right?
Yes.
But then they were like, she will create a son that is more powerful than the father. Mm-hmm. So then they were like, oh, holy heck, the best thing to do is marry her off to this random king.
To this random sucker. Like, just to let you know, Thetis is Achilles' mom. She is an important character.
She is a sea nymph.
She is
immortal.
Doing quite a bit in this war.
Yeah, she's actively there because she loves her precious baby boy. Mm-hmm. Which is surprising. Like, she is the most present godparent.
Yeah, she truly is like, you know what, let me take care of my son. But I think partially because the reason that both Thetis and Pallas were put in the situation where they're like, look, you can't not be married, so you need to have a son. But like Pallas, in the implication that he was like the safety net to keep Thetis from having a god tier son. Like, Pallas is sort of this like softer spoken kind of guy. Like, it's still questionable motivations and decisions, but like it's fascinating that like these great grand heroes with their big old things, and like he just kind of has like a dad who's just kind of chill and try not to cause problems.
It's also funny that like Achilles, as far as his lineage goes, it's supposedly less powerful than most of the other heroes, right? Because like most of the other heroes are like fathered by these really powerful gods like Poseidon or like Zeus. Zeus accounts for 80% of the heroes. But then, like, Thetis is like a minor deity compared to them. But Achilles is still the most powerful hero, which is really funny.
It is still fun. It is fun that I think part of the point. It's nice that like we get this sort of hero who feels sadness, or at least comes from this sort of untraditional place and is this untraditional hero, but still like presented as like the most powerful of them. But like he's the most powerful of the Greeks, but also he sings songs and is a big old sweetie, a big old not sweetie. He's filled with rage. He
has emotions. He has more emotions than Hercules. Heracles. See, Heracles has only like 2 emotions.
Just rage and more rage.
He has
rage and wrath, which is just rage but in
Achilles actually has the entire range of human emotion.
Yeah. And I think part of that comes from the fact that he has this kind of chill dad who's just like, you know what, we can just sing songs and eat fruit. I'm just citing the song.
He has a mother that loves him very much.
The most supportive parents in Greek.
Yeah, this is what happens when you combine a male wife with a girl boss. You get Achilles.
Yeah. Exactly. So now that we've covered our Greeks, we're gonna close down this episode because we are an hour in. But
we
don't
haven't
worry.
even gotten over the actual plot.
That's true. Tune in next time to hear.
We'll go over like Thetis and Hellas's marriage first because that's kind of where all of it starts.
We'll start around there and explain the Achilles heritage, but that will be a great transition into the next episode. So tune in next time to what are we calling this? Sober mythology.
We're not drunk. We don't support underage drinking.
We don't
tune
support
in next time to sober mythology.
Tune in next time. Don't get drunk. All right, bye.